Extending the number system. Imaginary complex numbers. In order to simplify a negative number, we must use imaginary numbers. An imaginary number when squared gives a negative result. So for square root of negative 25, since 25 is a negative, we have to use an imaginary number. You can just do this where you get the square root of 25 and you put an I after, or you do the square root of 25 times negative 1, because I squared equals negative 1, and you'll get the same answer. So for square root of negative 16, the square root of just 16 is 4, so the square root will be 4i. For negative 64, the square root will just be 8i. And that should be your answers. Imaginary and complex numbers. A complex number is a combination of a real number and an imaginary number. A complex number has two parts, a real part and an imaginary part. So a plus bi is basically your formula. So a is real and I is imaginary. So 10 plus the square root of negative 25. The square root of negative 25 is 5i, so you'll keep the 10, it'll be 10 plus 5i, and that's your answer. Now for 5 minus the square root of negative 16, you'll keep the 5 minus, and it will be, the square root of negative 16 is 4i, so it'll be 5 minus 4i. Adding and subtracting complex numbers. In order to add complex numbers, you add the real parts together and the imaginary parts together. So 4 plus 2i plus 8 plus 2i. We'll combine the real parts together, which is 4 and 8, which is 12, and the imaginary parts together, which is 2. And you should get 12 plus 4i. And for 2 plus 4i, plus 2 minus 7i, you combine like terms, so 2 plus 2 is 4. A positive 4i plus a negative 7i, so you have to remember to use the symbol before the number. So 4 plus negative 7 is 3, so plus 3i. And that should be your answer. Adding and subtracting complex numbers. For subtracting, in order to subtract complex numbers, you must first distribute the negative to the second complex number and then add them. So you'll distribute the negative, so to 9 into 2i. So it will become, you keep the 4 plus 8i. The negative will become a positive. So it will be negative 9 minus 2i. And you'll combine like terms, so it will be the same for adding. So 4 plus negative 9 is negative 5, and 8 plus a negative 2 is a positive 6i, and that should be your answer. And you'll do the same for this one. So 2 plus 12i minus 2 plus 8i. We'll distribute the negative, and so it will become, we'll keep the 2 plus 12i, become a positive. So we negative 2 minus 8i, or a negative 8i, and then 2 plus a negative 2 is actually 0. So then 12i plus a negative 8i is a 4i, or just 4i. And that should be your answer. Multiply complex numbers. In order to multiply complex numbers, you have to either FOIL or use the box method. I prefer the box method, so that's what I'm going to use. So for 4 plus I, 3 plus 5i, you use the box method. So we'll draw a box. And you'll put the 4 plus I at the top, so 4 and I, and then the 3 and the 5i. and then you will multiply. So 4 times 3 is 12. 3 times I is just 3i. 5i times 4 is 20i. And 5i times I is 5i squared. So then you'll combine like terms. Now for 5i squared, I squared equals negative 1. So you'll change this to 5, negative 1, which once you multiply those equals negative 5. So this will actually be a negative 5. You have to remember to do that or it won't come out as the right answer. So now that you did that, you combine like terms. So 12 plus a negative 5 equals 7. And 20i plus 3i equals 23i. And that should be your answer. You'll do the same for the bottom. So you use the box method. And 6 minus 2i. So make sure you keep the negative with the 2i and keep the negative with the 8 and the negative with the 10i. So negative 8 times 6 is negative 48. Negative 10i times 6 is negative 60i. Negative 8 times negative 2i is 16i. And negative 10i times a negative 2i equals a 20i squared. And you have to do the same thing we did in the previous example, which is 20 times a negative 1, since I squared equals a negative 1, which will make this a negative 20. So then you'll combine like terms. So negative 48 plus a negative 20 equals a negative 68. And a negative 60i plus 16i equals a negative 44i. And that is the answer you should get.
For dividing complex numbers, in order to divide a complex number, we must first find the conjugate of the denominator of the fraction. The conjugate of a complex number still has the same real and imaginary part, but the opposite sign. So for 4 plus 9i, you'll just change the sign to 4 minus 9i. And then you'll use the box method. And put 4 plus 9i for negative 9i. 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 9 and 36. And then 4 times negative 9 is negative 36i. And a negative 9 times 9 is negative 81i squared, which you'll change to just an 81. And then you'll combine like terms. So negative 36i plus 36i is just 0. And then 81 plus 16 is 97. So your answer will just be 97. And then the same for 6 minus 3i. It will be 6 plus 3i because you just change the sign. And you'll use the box method. So it'll be 6 minus 3i. 6, 3i. 6 times 6 is 36. 6 times 3 is 18i. 6 times negative 3 is negative 18i. And 3 times negative 3 is negative 9i squared, which will just be a 9. So then you combine like terms. So 36 plus 9 is 45. And 18i plus negative 18i is just 0. So your answer will just be 45. So for dividing complex numbers, you have to find the conjugate. After you find the conjugate of the denominator, multiply the top and bottom by that number. So for 9 plus 2i over 2 minus 4i, you will multiply by the conjugate of the denominator. So it will be 2 plus 4i. So then you'll use the box method, which will be 9 plus 2i, and then 2 plus 4i. 9 times 2 is 18. 9 times 4 is 36i. 2 times 2 is 4i. And 2 times 4 is 8i squared, which would just be negative 8. So then you'll combine like terms. So 18 plus a negative 8 is just 10. And 36 plus 4 is 40i. So that will go on the top. Because now you have to do another box method. And you'll do 2 minus 4i, 2 plus 4i. So 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times negative 4 is negative 8i. And 4 times negative 4 is negative 16i squared, or just 16. So you'll combine like terms. 16 plus 4 is 20. 8 plus negative is 8, just 0. So it will be 10 plus 40i over 20 should be your final answer. And same for the bottom. So you multiply 6 plus 2i, because that's a conjugate of 6 minus 2i. So you just do 4, 6, 2i. So for this one, you can already draw the other box over here, and we'll just do the same thing. So 6 times 6 is 36. 2 times 6 is 12i. Negative 2 times 6 is negative 12i. 2 times negative 4 is negative 4i squared, or just 4. And so then over here, 4 times 6 is 24. 4 times 2 is 8i. And then just be 6. And then 2